This is May 18th, 1987, and we're at the home of Miss Helen Turner. Helen Turner has been a professional nurse for many years, and we're very happy to be able to interview her this morning and find out the many things that she's done in the nursing profession. Helen, let's start out by telling us where you went to nursing school.
I went to nursing school at Norton Memorial Infirmary.
And this is in Louisville, Kentucky, right?
That's right.
Tell us what year that you started nursing.
I started nursing in 1929.
And this was what we call a diploma program, is that right?
That's right. That's what we had in those days.
That was it. I'm a graduate from one of those programs too. Tell us the date that you graduated.
August the 10th, 1932.
And that's a very significant date because you have that right at the tip of your memory. When were you licensed?
I was licensed in June 1932.
That's a bit unusual. Today the nurses graduate and then take their licensing exam. This looks like you got your license before you graduated.
I did. Because we watched the mailbox every morning to see what was coming in order to get our grades and know whether we passed or not.
Well, that's interesting. I know when I graduated, we really didn't worry about passing. We felt like after those 3 years, we would just automatically pass. Is that how you felt too?
That's exactly how I felt. I didn't cram like some of my schoolmates did, because I felt like, well, I had gotten what I can get, and I'll put it on paper that way.
So that was just a confirmation, but we were pretty sure that we were going to pass. Tell us about a typical day in your nursing school.
Oh, may I go back to the first day I entered school?
Yes, you may go back to the first day.
All right, the first day I entered school, I arrived at Norton at 9:30 in the morning. We dressed in uniforms, what they called the probation uniform, which was different from the student uniform. It was blue and the other was blue and white checked. Anyway, by 10:30 we were on the wards. They allowed us to clean up bedside tables and so on and so forth. So we started to work the day we arrived.
This was the very first day.
Very first day.
That is very interesting. Well, how did you know what your duty was? They just told you go ahead and clean those tables?
No, the instructor was with us, one of them. They only had two. But anyway, they divided us up in such a way that they could take care of us, know what we were doing and how we were doing and so on.
So this was your first day.
That was my first day.
Tell us about some of the other days when you were a probationer.
All right, during the time that I was a probationer, we usually had school or classes early in the morning. We had to be at the dining room at 5:30 in the morning, and we were inspected. We had to have our uniform just so, and our thermometer in our pocket, and our scissors in our pocket, and our syringe too, by the way, in our pocket to use for the day. And they checked to see if we had them, and they also checked your shoes to see if you'd polished them, checked your hose to see if you had runners, and so on. So anyway, that was the beginning of a day. And then we went to the classes, and we were taught, of course, nursing arts first, and we were taught the bath, the first thing. And we used each other to bathe in order to teach just exactly how we must bathe the patient, and the water temperature and so on. And we had thermometers to check the water temperature at that time. And then we were taught light procedures. But then when we would go on the floor in the afternoon, we worked making we made and folded our own sponges. We made our own Q-tips. We made cotton balls. In other words, we made up the dressings to be sterilized. And we didn't have a place for sterilization other than the operating room. We didn't have central supply as we have today. So those were sent to the operating room in cans, sterilized, and sent back to each unit.
And nothing was disposable like it is today.
No, we didn't even know what disposable
Well,
meant.
That's true, I'm sure. Okay. Those were the early days. Do you remember your first day taking care of a real live patient?
Yes, I do. The real life patient, we had wards. We're 16-bed wards. And this was a male. And I remember that he had had some surgery, and he didn't think he could turn, and so on and so forth. And I don't think we're supposed to turn him in those days. But I couldn't get to his back if I didn't turn him. So in bathing him, I turned him. My instructor informed me we weren't supposed to do those things unless we asked about it. But anyway, that was my first day taking care of a patient.
Oh, that's interesting.
We fed him, and all our operating room patients were fed, our operating patients were fed each morning for 10 days. We didn't allow them to get up on their elbow or to sit up on the side of the bed and so on.
So different from today when we know all about hypostatic pneumonia and how we want to get them moving and turning and up. And
Right.
I didn't realize that they even fed the patients. That's very interesting.
Yes, we had to feed them.
10 days.
And I remember the second patient I had was a patient that could not swallow well and could not, in fact, he wasn't supposed to be having anything to eat except broth or something like that. And I spent about 45 minutes getting that man to take a teaspoon at a time of broth and so on. So it was interesting, really.
We learned patience right from the beginning, didn't we?
Uh-huh.
Well, how long was your day? I know that the days were a lot longer when I was a student, and I'm sure they were a lot longer when you were a student.
We went on duty in the morning after our inspection, our breakfast, at 7 o'clock. We worked till 7 o'clock. We had from 1 to 3 in the afternoon off for some rest hours. And that was usually it. But may I tell you about our dining room too?
Oh, yes, I'd like to hear about that.
The reason I want to now is because it fits in. When we were inspected, then we went into the dining room. And there were long tables with each class. For instance, we were probationers, and then your first year, your second year, and your third year were at tables. And they were arranged because they were our seniors, and we had to stand up to them and so on. So anyway, we had the house mother at the head of our table. And the plates were brought into her, and then the food was brought to her, and she put it on our plates, and we ate what she put on our plates.
Oh, that really is interesting.
And we always had our blessing at the table before we would start eating. And the house mother took care of that for us.
Oh, that's interesting.
We weren't allowed to do anything, I don't think.
You were told to do what you had to do at every
That's
minute,
right.
just about, weren't you? Okay, so you said it was from 7 to 7. Did you get off then for the night? Did you have to work night duty? Or
No, we got off at night. If we were on night duty, which of course not in the beginning,
that was
we
later?
went on at 7 and stayed on until 7 in the morning. We didn't have any time off at night like we did during the day.
So they were always 12-hour shifts. I remember from my nursing school days, a lot of it was spent being very tired. I'm sure it was with you too.
Yes, it was.
Of course, good thing we were young. We couldn't do it today.
No, I couldn't do it today, I'm sure.
Okay. Did you get paid any during the time you were in school?
Yes, we did. We were paid $5 a month.
$5 a month.
Yes. Uh-huh.
That was enough to buy your hose, probably.
Well, your hose didn't cost but 25 cents in those days.
So you had some spending money then.
Yes.
But no time to spend it in.
No, really, you didn't. Once in a while, we'd have a day off where we'd go to town and do our shopping. And I remember the first dress I bought, I had saved $7. And that was the first dress that I bought after I went into nursing school.
Isn't that something? So there were a lot of restrictions on your lifestyle. Did you work weekends?
Yes. We worked weekends. We were allowed, if we went to a church nearby, to go to our Sunday school class and come back to our duty. Come back to work, in other words.
Was Norton's a religious affiliated school at the time?
Yes, Episcopalian.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
However, I was a Baptist, and Walnut Street Baptist Church was right just about half a block from Norton at that time. So that's where I went to Sunday school. I can tell you a little incident there if you'd like to hear it.
Oh, I'd like to hear that.
One night, we had been out to our Sunday school teacher's home, which was the minister's wife, to a little party for the Sunday school class. And when we got back, the administrator of the hospital, which was a woman, was looking for us. And all the other girls that went to the party had lost their purses, but we had ours. And they were accusing us of taking the purses. So Miss Gaggs was her name. And she said, my girls would not do a thing like that. So anyway, the police came about that time, and they had found the purses back of the house, poked down in garbage cans and so on. So we were released. But Miss Gaggs definitely turned to the Sunday school teacher and told her, she said, I don't appreciate this because these girls are honest girls.
Oh, that's interesting.
It was interesting.
Oh, my goodness. So you graduated in August of 1932. What do you remember about your first job in nursing?
Well, that was Depression times, wasn't it?
It was.
And I got out right in the middle of it. So the morning that I went for my last day, I didn't have a job. I didn't have a place to live. I didn't know what I was going to do. Of course, I could depend on my parents to send me money to help me, but I didn't want to do that. So I went over to the unit and went to work, and I was helping the doctor, who was a surgeon and chief of staff. And he looked up at me and he said, Helen, he always called me by my first name. Ordinarily, you weren't supposed to do that, you know. It's Miss Turner. But anyway, he said, where are you going to work? I said, I don't know. And he said, well, what are you going to do? Where are you going to live? I said, I don't know. And he said, well, do you have uniforms and so on? I said, you know, you don't have to put your white uniforms on, don't you? I said, yes, but I don't have any. And he said, I'll be back up in a little bit. He came back up and he told me to go down to the office. And they secured me as a general duty nurse. And that was the first general duty nurse in the hospital. And he also came back. And he had opened an account for me. You want to turn it off?
Okay, we're going to continue now. This gentleman was helping you out, this chief of staff. Go on and tell us about, he opened up an account for you?
He opened the account as stewards for me to get my uniform and my shoes and my hose and any other thing that I might need in order to come to work dressed. Then he handed me a key to a little apartment down a very short distance from the hospital and said, here, now, here's your apartment. So I felt quite elated that somebody would stop and help me to that extent.
Well, he must have had a lot of respect for you. Felt like you would be a very good nurse for him to do that.
I had always had a lot of respect for him. Of course, in our day, the chief of nurse, the administrator of the hospital, and the senior nurses met the chief of staff at the door, and they followed him all the way around as he made his rounds over the hospital. And he made his rounds from the operating room to the delivery room all the way through.
This was a very patriarchal system, wasn't it? You can see how this worked out very well for you in this instance. How long did you work then as the general duty nurse?
I worked until 1937. That was the flood in Owensboro. Well, I worked in Owensboro too, in Louisville.
Louisville.
And I remember the night we were on duty, and of course you didn't have anything but the uniform you had on with you, and you couldn't get back to your apartment because we saw the water coming up 3rd Street. So anyway, a friend of mine, we graduated together, decided we were going to go out and help with the people in the flood. So we called in. We went down to the office and told them, and they was very delighted that we wanted to do this thing. So we was supposed to meet a boat at a little church, which was from about a block from the corner of 3rd. So we put on our boots and we waded down the street to this church. They didn't come for us. And apparently they missed the connections and so on and so forth, and they were sending out boats in order to take us to the area where we would work. So anyway, we went to bed on the pews in the church and slept. So the next morning, they did come to take us and did take us. But my family found out that I was lost in the water in Louisville by the radio that night. And they didn't know for days and days where I might be. But anyway, we went to the headquarters, and we were sent down to Fountain Ferry Park. It was an amusement park in Louisville, as you remember. And the building that they gave to us, which was the only building out of water, was a skating rink building.
Oh my heavens.
And we had to put the skates up out of our way and put us up some beds, cots, and so on and so forth in order to take people in. So we traveled up and down the river there to pick up people out of houseboats and living in houses and so on and so forth. And of course it was declared martial law in Louisville. And we had to take a doctor, a nurse, and one of the Army officers in the boat, as well as somebody who drove the boat, I guess you would say.
Oh, that's so interesting. What kind of injuries did these people have? Just exhaustion and
Mostly
exposure?
exhaustion, and then some of them from exposure. We had one child that we found. The father was holding in his arm that had expired.
Oh.
And apparently he had had pneumonia and so on. And he didn't want us to take him. So we had to send in to headquarters and get a casket, bring it out and put him in, and then take the father and he, so he knew where he was. But anyway, most of the patients we had would be like diabetics, where we had to go and see that they had their insulin and so on. And patients of that type we took care of. Then they didn't have any food, so we prepared the food at headquarters, our headquarters. Made a big stew on the top of what we said was a pot-bellied stove. And then we take it out in buckets to all these places that didn't have food.
Oh dear.
So, and then too, we vaccinated everybody for typhoid fever and kept that going all the time we were out.
So you had a lot of different jobs, and you never knew what you were going to get into.
I never
little,
do.
Little
Never
cooking
do.
And
I just loved to get into things that I felt like I could do something worthwhile.
well, that certainly was worthwhile. How long were you out on that duty then, before you got
3
back?
weeks.
3 weeks.
I didn't have my shoes off for 3 weeks. And when I took them off, they fell apart.
Oh my goodness.
I didn't take them off, they just fell off.
Did you sleep at all during that time?
If you did, we laid down on benches we had and so on and so forth like that.
Oh,
But we
my.
were young, it didn't hurt us.
And you didn't even think about it, probably. You
And
just-
all I had on was, you know, when you first get out trading in those days, you had to have a fur coat. And so I had bought a fur coat. And that's what I had on.
And the shoes that fell apart.
But anyway, we went down to Stewart's one day. The lieutenant didn't have anything. He wore his jacket out or something. So we went down there and they gave us some jackets and things. So the day that I took my shoes off, or my boots off, we went back again to Bick's. And they had all their shoes and things up on the balcony. So they hunted me out 2 pair of shoes and gave them to me.
Oh, that is so interesting. So life was probably pretty dull once you got back to the hospital after this great adventure.
Well, you see, when I got back to the hospital, I decided I was going home. I wanted to see my family. So I resigned. And they were living in Henderson, Kentucky at that time. No, excuse me. They were in Owensboro, Kentucky, out from Owensboro, a little town called Whitesville. Anyway, it was Davis County.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went down there and stayed a few weeks and then went back to Louisville and worked again. Then went back to Owensboro because my brother, who was a diabetic, had to have some surgery and we'd almost lost him at the time, so I stayed. And the little hospital in Owensboro was just a very small hospital, about 50 beds. But they had a school of nursing, I want you to know. So when I started to work, the administrator had just come there, and she was from Nebraska. And she called me one night and said, "Would you work on weekends?" I said, "I work when I'm needed." So I was living out about 15 miles, so she said, "Will you be here in the morning?" And I said, "Yes, I will." So I went in. I hadn't intended to go to work in Owensboro, but I did, didn't I? So anyway, I went in, and she said, "Now I don't even know where things are here." So she hadn't been there but just a month. And the poor thing was lost, and that people didn't want to help her because they didn't like her, you know, new person coming in, they didn't care for her. In Nebraska too,
It was a far piece, wasn't it, from Owensboro?
Yeah. So anyway, she's come in, and I went over. She's signing me to a ward, which had the patients that were, what did they call them? Anyway, they were patients who didn't have the money to pay the bills and so on.
Indigent patients.
That wasn't what they called them. I was trying to think what they called them. But anyway, it was indigent patients. But, so when I went over there was patients on cots, strapped down. Black people, white people, and everything. It was a mess. And I went over and I said, "I'm not going to work in a condition like that." And she said, "What's the matter?" I said, "I want some beds for those patients." So I bathed them all. She sent me this colored man, a great big old colored man. I called him Punjo, you know, little orphan Annie. And anyway, he and I cleaned up the patients. He would carry the men into the bathtub and put them in, and we'd bathe them. And then we'd take them back, and she sent me some beds, and we got beds and clean sheets and so on. They all went to sleep. And by the time their meal came at noon, they were comfortable. So that was my experience there.
In Owensboro.
But then the next morning, the nurses didn't like me. So they was going to send me away because they didn't give baths on Sunday.
That was interesting. They had made up their own little rule like that. I'd never heard that one before. But you stayed in Owensboro for a while.
25 years.
Oh my goodness, that was a while.
Uh-huh.
Did
Yeah.
you become the director of nurses there with that hospital?
Yes, I did. I worked with Miss Dietrich as her assistant for quite a long time. Miss Dietrich was the administrator of the hospital.
Is this the lady from Nebraska?
Uh-huh.
Uh-huh.
And then they came down for inspection of the School of Nursing, and apparently the School of Nursing, the doctors owned the nursing school. They were in charge of that. And I looked at this and I said, well, I'm not going to work here like that. And she said, well, you won't. She said, you go to Frankfurt or go to wherever you go. So I called Louisville, which is the nursing office, and went up to Louisville, met Miss Emma Hunt Cassash. She was one of the first persons in the nursing office in Louisville, in order where we had took our state boards and so on and so forth. So she went with us, and we went to Frankfurt. And the Attorney General was your legal help at that time. So we got it all changed in one day and came back, and she said to me, you know any nurses that might teach? I said, well, do you? And she said, yes, one. The first thing you know, we gathered up one or two people and got them in there, and the others left anyway. They didn't want to be with us. So they came in and started to work. And then a night or two after that, she called me at home. She said, I've got a bed fixed for you here. I said, what do you have a bed fixed for me? She said, we're going to have to do the operating room tonight. She said, I'll circulate and you can scrub. All the nurses walked out.
Why were they unhappy? Because of changes?
They just didn't like somebody else coming in and telling them what to do. You know, they'd been settled there for so long that they didn't like that. And for a long, long time, the administrator of the hospital was a real old woman, a nurse. And she didn't keep up with the times, you know.
And you had come in there as a change agent, trying to get this established where the nurses had more say-so rather than the doctors running the show. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't aware that physicians owned a nursing school. That was a real interesting.
But they didn't want it. It was placed that way in order to open the school, I think, because of the conditions probably.
They had enough responsibility. They didn't need that, did they?
No, they didn't. So anyway, we had one surgery that night, an appendix. And that the doctor who came in was from out in Ohio County. He poured the ether, and they poured the ether too, I want you to know. Kept that poor old patient out all that time.
That old drop ether.
Did appendix on him. And when I finished, I went out and looked out, and here was all this gas lighted under a sterilizer. I thought, Lord, we could have blown off this hill. I said, Frida, we could have blown off this hill. And she said, what's the matter? And she looked, she said, oh my goodness. I said, in the morning, we're going to Evansville and we're going to buy a sterilizer. We've got steam here. She said, yes. So we went to Evansville and bought some equipment for the operating room.
They had no gas sterilizer and were dropping ether. Boy, oh boy.
Wouldn't that have been something?
Could have had a great explosion.
I don't know how they went that long.
Without having had a bad explosion.
And then can I tell you another experience?
Yes.
Well, we went down into the basement of the old building, and there was supposed to be a lot of things stored there, and we looked around, and we found the colored man that was supposed to be firing a furnace at night, and he was sleeping back in there, and I wished you could have seen where he was sleeping. It was terrible. So Miss Dietrich said, get up out there and get out of here. I don't need you anyway. So he did. He left. And we went on back and looked, and we could see stacks of beds and so on. And equipment that could have been used. Some of it brand new equipment, just been stored down in there. So she said, what are we going to do about this? I said, well, you get 2 men, and these 2 women will put on some coveralls, and we'll clean this place. So we spent 2 days cleaning out the basement and getting down to where we could see what was there and what wasn't
there. What year did they start a nursing school in Owensboro? You know how long
Let me look. Yeah.
that was in existence?
I may have some material right here to tell me if I hadn't. I had it out last night looking at it, so I may have. Look here. All my junk I've got to keep up with things.
Well, you're looking at that. Do you remember what your salary was? Were you getting paid?
$65 a month.
This was in Owensboro. $65 a month.
That's about what they were paying in Louisville, too. That school, our nursing started in their first class graduated in 1902. There were 3 students in the class.
So it had been about 30 years or 30-some years before you arrived on the scene to make some changes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's great. Okay, well, we've talked a lot about what nurses did, which was a little bit of everything, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
You just did what you had to do to fit the situation.
Just to take care of
change.
them.
And what was the relationship with other health professionals at that time?
I didn't quite understand the question.
What was the relationship with other health professionals at that time when you were in Owensboro?
Well, of course, it was doctor and nurse.
Nurse. That was about the extent of it, wasn't it?
That was right. And there was a pretty good relationship. And I learned to know the doctors. And, of course, I learned to love them all. They were all good men. And at the time I came there, this young man came from Indianapolis as we call him, a medical doctor in those days.
Mm-hmm.
And he was the person who took care of my brother at the time when we had him in the hospital. He had just finished some internship in Indianapolis and had a lot of experience with diabetics. So that was quite helpful at the time.
That's good. Well, what year then did you leave Owensboro and come to Bowling Green from Owensboro?
Yes, I did. That was in, when did I come to Bowling Green?
You said
1960. Looking here, excuse me, Mary.
How long did you say you were in Owensboro? 25 years, did you say?
Mm-hmm. I thought it might tell me here on this paper, but I don't see it. I don't remember.
Late 50s or early 60s, somewhere in there. Did Bowling Green still have a nursing school when you came?
Mm-hmm.
They did.
No. Now, I guess I better go back. I was on state board. Then they elected a board of nurses to help to investigate and plan for the students in these various hospitals and so on and so forth. And that must have been in about 42, somewhere along there, that I was appointed to the board by the governor. Anyway, that way I had the privilege of helping a whole lot as far as the schools were concerned. And we had made some investigation into some of the schools, so Bowling Green was closed, and we sent the students to Louisville, to the General Hospital, to finish their training. And I think Ms. Waddle, who was here when I came here on OB.
I remember her. She was here when I came.
She was a graduate from the old hospital through the General Hospital in Louisville. And in the Murray, we had to do the same thing. And
Did you work in Frankfurt then, or
No, I still was at the hospital.
you were still in Owensboro, but you just
Owensboro,
worked
but I
through
went
the
back and
board.
forth. I think I was working as much for the State Board of Nursing as I was for the hospital.
Uh-huh.
But anyway, during the war then, let's see if I need to go back a little bit here. Yeah, during the war, at the School of Nursing in Owensboro, we had, by that time, built a wing, and we had some facilities for teaching and so on, a lab and whatnot. And of course, our doctors, there were just 2 doctors left in Owensboro.
Everybody else had
they
gone
went
out
to service.
fight in
Uh-huh.
World War II.
And so we didn't have anybody to teach. Doctors taught a lot, in those days too.
That's right, they did.
So we didn't have anybody to teach, so I taught anatomy, microbiology, anything that came along, I think. And there was an older man in the x-ray department, a Dr. Disbrow. And he would outline the anatomy for me, and we got a cat and cut up the cat and all those things to teach the anatomy. But they passed their state board, so I guess we
Did pretty good.
did pretty good.
Well, how large were the classes? That would be interesting, of nursing.
Going back just a step, we had cadet students at that time. And we had about 15 in each class. And we took 2 a year.
Oh.
And cadet students, they had uniforms and they were paid a stipend and so on and so forth.
And then when they finished, they could go in the service.
And then when they finished, they'd go into the service, or if they liked, they'd go into another hospital. And being on the state board at that time, we had to give the state board examinations 6 months ahead of their graduation, so that if they wanted to go in the service, they could go ahead, and then we wouldn't give them a grade until such time as they would have finished nursing school. And then if they went to another hospital, which they could for experience, and so on, we did that. But at that time, we made our own examinations. We graded our own examinations for state board.
Each
Yeah.
hospital had a different state board at that time?
No. We
I
had
see
it
what
in
you're
Louisville.
Okay.
But
Each
I was
state
on the
did that.
I was on the state board, you see, and I had 2, I believe, 2 tests that I made the questions for, and we would make the questions, then we would grade the questions, and then we'd meet again after we got our papers graded and so on, so that we could send the grades out to the nurses.
Mm-mm.
That was during the war.
That was World War
And
II.
you didn't have enough stamps and gasoline, to get back and forth to Louisville very often. So you had to get on the train. And I'd get on the train real early in the morning. I think it was 4 o'clock or something like that. And all these soldier boys on the train, and they had dirty feet too, because you could smell the odor the minute you stuck your head in the door. But I don't think I could do it again.
Those were hard times, weren't
They
they?
were hard days, yes they were. So then, following all that, I decided that we need the School of Nursing in the universities. And I went to New York, and that was the first state that had attempted this sort of thing. They were going to secure the nurses in one leading hospital, and then they would be a part of the university. Of course, this was a university hospital, so they would secure the nurses for that hospital as students, and then they were taught at the university, their classes. But they were going to have their clinical experience in a certain area there of about, I guess, about 25 or 30 mile radius in little hospitals. So I decided that might be a good idea for Western Kentucky. So I asked if I might attend the hospital administrators board, and I did, and they liked the idea. So we thought we'd get started. So I came to Western. Maybe Western wouldn't like this if I told it, but anyway, it's true. And because this was central as far as I could see it.
Mm-hmm.
And the president of the university said, we don't want nursing in the university. No, we don't want that.
And who was president then? That's okay. We can figure it out.
Anyway,
You don't want to
he said, thumbs down. So I got up, went to the door, and I said, you know, you may not have nursing in your university in Western Kentucky, but we're going to have it. And I went home real determined, went back to Owensboro. I was still in Owensboro then. So I said to this doctor that was a real good friend, Dr. Leslie Dodson in Owensboro. He was now dead. But anyway, he was a surgeon and a true blue one, and he was really a friend. I said, I need something. He said, what do you need? I told him what I wanted to do. And he said, well, I've been hearing that, and you didn't tell me. And I said, yes, but I'm stumped right now. And he said, what's the matter? I said, I went to Western. And that wasn't what it was called then, was it? It was Teachers College, wasn't it? But anyway, he said, well, I can get you someplace. He said, I went to school with Dr. Woods down at Murray. So we went to school in Berea. So we called him. We secured a director of nursing education for the state, a Mrs. Struder, so that she could help us to get this set up from the state level. And we went to Murray. She came down, and the executive secretary from the state board came down. We went to Murray. Dr. Woods had every department head that would be those persons that might have the nursing classes in their departments. And his other personnel that would have been so related in a meeting. And that day we settled the thing. We had everything all ready to open that school of nursing. So we went to Frankfurt and got that all settled and straightened out in Frankfurt through the Attorney General. And took in, I believe our first we had 10 students in the class. And Ruth Cole, who is still in Murray and was at the university for years there, was a friend of mine, and she was in charge of the nursing at the University of Murray. So we worked together quite closely on this. But we got ready to send the students out, and we found out that none of these hospitals were approved by the Joint Commission. None of these little hospitals.
Oh,
And I'd forgotten that when I was doing all my work. So I said to Miss Struder and Miss Greathouse, I said, we're going to Chicago. And I said, the state board's going to pay my way. So anyway, we went to Chicago.
You took the 10 students? with
No,
you?
no,
Oh,
no. We went up and got the Joint Commission, went to the office, and got Hopkinsville approved as a hospital for students. And they got them approved for Joint Commission.
I see.
Then we got Glasgow. We put the hospital down that we were going to use down here, and then they came down and investigated them, because really and truly 8 students we could take care of at Hopkinsville real well.
Uh-huh.
So that's where we started, and that's the first school of nursing in the university in Western Kentucky, or
Kentucky.
we might say in Kentucky.
Well, that is so interesting. And the students, how did they get to these hospitals? And just
We
took them and...
we had we used Miss Struder as an instructor too, to some extent,
Mhm.
and then the university would send instructors with them, so that we didn't interfere as far as the hospital was concerned until we got the thing started. Then we secured personnel in the hospital.
So they
to stay
stayed
there.
however long, 6 months or 3 months or...
They stayed during the summer. for their 3 years as far as their classwork was concerned at Murray. Then they went back after that for one full 6 months in the hospital.
That is so interesting. So that's how Murray got their School of Nursing. That's how that was started.
But we could have had it at Western.
And they waited till the 60s before they ever got started.
Well, you want me to tell you about how we got started there?
Sure. Well, I want to hear how you got to Bowling Green.
Yes, we better get to Bowling Green, hadn't I?
And you said that was in the late 50s or early 60s that you came to Bowling Green.
But that would be connected with the school.
Oh, that's how you got here.
That's the reason I came here.
Uh-huh.
Mr. Clark called me and wanted to know if I could find him a director of nursing. It's so that they could get the hospital ready for clinical experience for students. And I was trying to find him a director of nursing. And one day I was sitting at my desk in Owensboro, and I thought, well, that'd be a challenge. I believe I'd like that. And I got up and I told my secretary, I'm going to be gone a while. And I said, probably about 4 or 5 hours. And my mother may call you, but will you see that she gets taken care of if anything happens? And she said, yes, I will. Where are you going? I said, that's for me to know. So I just left, uniform and all, and came to Bowling Green. And my sister worked in the emergency room there. You remember Alice Hagerman?
Yes, I know Alice. Uh-huh.
Alice Hagerman, and she looked up and said, what in the world are you doing over here? I said, I came to see Mr. Clunner. And she frowned. She couldn't figure that one out, So I went on back to his office, and because I'd called him and told him I was coming over. And we talked, and he secured me right there. And we went all over the hospital, and they had new equipment and everything else up here that they could have used, and they weren't even using it. I said, why do you got those on the shelves for? So anyway, we decided that we could straighten it out. So I came to Bowling Green.
So this was clinical experience for the students at Western.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. But you see, I worked very closely with the people at the university at that time, too.
Mm-hmm. So there's been some significant events and changes since the time you started practice and in education. What were some of the changes then that you saw from the time you came to Bowling Green? From the time that you retired from the hospital here in Bowling Green?
Well, some of the changes as far as teaching was concerned in regard to the students for the clinical experience.
And practice as well, any of the changes?
Well, of course, practice changed extensively because during the war, there was new drugs such as penicillin and so on and so forth that came out at that time.
That's
what was the other antibiotic that they had before that?
Sulfa drugs.
Uh-huh. And so on. So there was a great change there. And as far as instruction was concerned, there was a great change in helping students with these sort of things too.
Mm-hmm.
Because you see, even though you had drugs in solution and pharmacology, you had to see the actual thing to work with it. So there was a great change there.
So before the war, nurses just did a lot of bathing and feeding and just a lot of hygiene and personal needs there.
That's
but
right.
Then when medications came into play, then there was a whole new era
Because at the time, I guess we had 5 drugs that we had on the shelf. Probably. Castor oil was one of them.
How about milk and magnesia?
We didn't have milk and magnesia. Didn't know anything about milk.
that. Just castor oil.
Castor oil, digitalis, ergotrate, eutropium, And let's see, what was the other one? Your laudanum and morphine. See, we had Panapon after that and all that sort of thing, you know. We had a lot of changes as far as drugs are concerned.
Oh, that's so interesting. So that was a big.
So you didn't
difference.
really, I mean, giving your patient the drugs wasn't a problem as it is today.
Oh, and
You
every
just
time.
put your pill on your tray and went out and gave it to them, and that was it.
That
you
was
know.
it.
Yeah.
And there's so many drugs today that nurses need to keep up with. Well, that is a
I
big
had a
change.
paper upstairs that I was going to get, but I couldn't get up there to get it, so also maybe someday I'll get it just to show to you. One of the things that was before I came to Bowling Green, we had a doctor who was a surgeon, and he started using glycerine in the, we'd sterilize it, and where we'd have ruptured appendices, in which we had lots of them. We'd sterilize and put about 8 ounces in the abdomen. And it had a osmosis effect. And that would help the drainage there. And we got a lot of his patients well just because of that. And I had the paper that he had written when he first started out.
That is interesting.
Uh-huh. And that was before antibiotics, too. Really.
Because ruptured appendix usually meant the end, didn't it? Peritonitis.
It did in those days.
Okay, so you were in Bowling Green then how many years before you retired?
Well, I retired in 74 and came over here, in 60?
Early 60s, sometime we've determined.
Yeah, I think it's 62.
I had always heard that before I came to Bowling Green in 1970 that they had different dining rooms for the colored and the white at the Bowling Green Hospital.
And they had different wards for the white and the colored and so on. They did everywhere in this area of the state.
So when did that change? Do you remember?
Well, I'd been over here about 4 years when we changed all that, when we cleaned up the hospital and built some new wing up there and so on.
Did you find your experience in Bowling Green rewarding?
Yes, I did.
You were very involved in your professional organization.
Yes.
During all that time, weren't you?
Yes, I was.
And so, immediately then, the hospital was open for students' clinical experience during the time you were here.
They gave me, I think I had about 6 months to get things ready and get supervisors prepared and so on. You see, we started then having our staff meetings and so on and so forth, so that we could do these things and make them understand what some of them didn't realize what they were going to get into. You know. So we started that way, and the instructors at Western helped me a great deal that way too, so that we could teach them and get them ready for that.
Do you remember any of the first instructors' names at Western? Was Janice Gibson? She was.
Yes, Janice was one of the first. From the time, I think, when we first started that, she was working for what we called a TB. We had a board for infectious diseases. And we particularly at that time was interested in the TB hospitals and those types of things. And then we went into psychiatry, and then she was the person who, and I think I was on that board for psychiatric patients and so on. That was her first experience, I believe, with psychiatry.
That's right, and she's still doing that.
Denise, and then I was trying to think of the person who was in charge of nursing. Maybe I'll think of what her name was, Lucy.
Lucy Irwin. She was
Lucy
here
Irwin.
early on.
And I was trying to think of the nurse that was with her. They were friends, but I can't think of her name.
Mary somebody. Wasn't it Mary? Oh, I can't remember. Well, what was their practice like? Did they have 12-hour shifts when the Western students?
No, maybe I need to go back a little while to Louisville. I was chairman of the first organization to change the hours in nursing. And there was a lot of private duty nurses at that time, as we called them, because there's many private duty nurses working. They needed them because they didn't have sufficient in the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
So we met. We had about 3 different meetings. Then we approached the administrators of the hospital and so on. And that's when we changed to 8-hour duty.
And this was while you were still in Louisville?
That's while I'm still in Louisville. So that's been a year or 2 ago, hasn't it?
Yeah, that was a while back.
That was before 37 anyway. It would be around about 35, I guess. Not too long after I got out of school anyway.
And so that was during those years that you were so involved in education, was when they were really emphasizing education as being as important as the cleaning type duties that
That's right.
we all were
That's right.
exposed
That
to.
was the sole emphasis then was on education and to
You
teach
need to
our
get-
nurses so that they understood about the necessity for knowing something about the drugs, knowing something about the equipment that they were using and so on.
And knowing about the physiology and
Mm-hmm.
of the body and why they were doing these things.
You see, that's when we first got oxygen tents and
Iron lungs.
iron lungs. Yes, we had an epidemic of polio in Owensboro before I came over here. And the iron lungs were placed at the General Hospital in Louisville, and you took the patient to that particular area for them to be put into an iron lung. But we had a small piece of equipment that we could use to keep the person alive until we got them into the iron lung.
That's so interesting.
Can I ask a question, Donna?
Sure, go ahead.
I was just thinking about this, Miss Turner. I've been reading some nursing history, and one of the things that interested me was I remember reading an article by a woman who said that in the 1930s, nurses were actively discouraged from getting married because they were too busy with their patients in the hospital to take care of a home and a job too. Do you
Well,
recall any instances
Yes.
of that?
You see, when I went into nursing, we were not allowed to be married while we were in the School of Nursing. And when we first organized the nursing at the University of Murray, we were not, those students were not allowed to be married, and that would be during that time.
That carried over.
I remember that the little Douglas girl that lived in Scottsville was a student, and she was, see, I lived in Scottsville, and I knew her father and her people and everything, and that's the reason she came to the hospital in Owensboro to go to nursing school. And she got married during that time, and I knew it. And, I decided that I just wasn't going to know it.
Just ignore it.
Just ignore it. Because she didn't like me just about a year being out. And her father came over to me just before she was ready to graduate. I said, now you don't need to tell me anything because I know everything. So he didn't. But anyway, she was married. She married a Bell, young man that I knew there in Owensboro.
Well, we've talked a lot about many changes in nursing practice and education. Where do you think nursing will be in the year 2000 and why?
Where do I think that it will
Nursing
be?
will be. What big changes do you think will happen in the next 20 years or so?
Well, I think that we're going to be concerned more extensively with some of all this new equipment that's coming in because of heart surgery and with some of the other surgery we're doing now and transplants and all these things. So I think that we're going to have to concern ourselves with learning the equipment and the needs in these situations, because I believe our hospital, all of the state, are going to be starting transplants and
it's much more technical than it was.
Yes,
Much
it's going to be.
Continue
much,
to be.
Much
And
technical.
everybody's going to have to be computer literate.
Well, I think we'll be using a lot of computer, won't we,
Mm-hmm.
for all these things.
Medical Center uses them, and Greenview's going to use them.
Well, with your intensive care, you know, of course.
All your monitoring
It's the first
systems.
intensive care unit. We sent Ms. Capto and to St. Louis, and let's see, where did we send the other nurse in order that they learn about the heart patient.
These special units.
Mhm.
It's going to be more specialized than it ever was, I believe.
Yes, it is.
Mhm.
And we're going to be more concerned as far as the operating room and whatnot is, I think. I think nurses are going to be doing more things there. Now, I'm not going to say she's going to take the place of the doctor, but it's going to be her responsibility to know the technicalities and whatnot concerning each of these surgeries in order to support. Don't you?
Oh, I think so. We've got to know about all this high tech, and where does that leave the patient, though? The nurse-patient has always been the strongest bond, or the strongest need, our strongest reason for being is the patient. Do you think the patient's going to get lost in all this
No, I don't.
tech?
Because when we started nurse aides here, you know, we started working with the vocational school in order to train our people. Now we're going to train more extensively, I think, these people. And of course your practical nurse is going to fit in there, isn't she? So that we have the bedside care and the patient concern.
Do you not see the nurse giving any or very little of the bedside care?
I don't think the nurse is going to give too much of the bedside care. I think it's going to, it would hurt me if I had to do it that way. But I think that's what's going to happen at the bedside care. You see, there's not too much bedside care anyway. Next day you get those patients up and walk them, don't you? So your bedside care is not going to require the need that
It once did.
Do you think that?
I think that we're going to need somebody to be there for the patient. The question is, who is it going to be?
Well, now, I definitely feel that you're going to need your head nurse and your so on and so forth on your units.
To still be the patient advocate.
Yes.
But the needs of the patient have changed. I'll agree with that.
Yes, they've changed a great deal. Some of it I like, some of it I don't. Do you?
No, I agree. We've gotten away from a lot of the things that were probably very important. How did you find out about the Nurse Practice Act?
Well, we had professional adjustments in school. When called, it was called ethics in nursing. And of course we talked about those things.
Back in late 20s and early 30s.
That's
we were
right.
talking about it. What did you say the class was called? Not ethics, but professional adjustment.
That's professional adjustment.
Adjustment. When did you join KNA?
Well, I'd say about 1932.
So you were a member from the very beginning. Was KNA and ANA together when you first joined?
It was A&A that you joined,
Uh-huh.
and then KNA was a part of A&A, as we put it.
Uh-huh. That was that way from the very beginning. Why did you join?
Well, I felt like that I was in the profession. I wanted all the help that I could gain from various organizations and so on and so forth, as well as I began taking extra classes from the time I finished school.
Was that common? Did your peers, people that you graduate, did they
no,
join?
It wasn't really common. I guess it was just one of my desires in life. And I took class at the University of Louisville and to Nazareth College, it wasn't called then. Then when I came to Owensboro, I went out to Mount St. Joseph, which is now, what is the name? Brescia in Owensboro, and took classes. We'd go at night, and the sisters we'd always take them out some lunch and so on and so forth, and we had a good time. I learned more chemistry than I ever knew in my life. And then, when I finished with that, I went to, I really wasn't finished, those classes I could add. I went to Colorado, Greeley, Colorado, they had, New York had the first nursing education university for registered nurses, and then Greeley had the second. So I decided I'd like to be in Colorado anyway, so that's where I went to get my nursing education.
It sounds like you've always had a spirit of adventure and challenge. Anything that was new and different and you thought you could make a difference, you were right in there, weren't you?
I wanted to do it. It seemed to me like I just had to do it. I don't know why.
Well, that's just a wonderful way to be, and you've certainly made a lot of changes and seen a lot of changes. Back to the KNA just a minute. I think it would be interesting to note what the dues were in 1932, if you can remember.
For $5.
$5. What a comparison to today. Of course, everything is inflated.
Yeah.
And
that's right.
did that seem like a lot of money back then?
Yes, that was a lot of money at that time. You see. Look at your salary.
$65 a month. So that was a lot of money. What were some of the activities of the KNA? You had your meetings and
Yeah.
just like they do
usually
today?
it was the state meetings that we attended. We didn't have too many local
District meetings.
situations. And then we started out with the districts later on, I think.
Were you ever president of the district?
For the district? Yes, I was president of the district in Owensboro, president of the district here. And oh yeah, we had the organization for, I can't think of it, so I'll think in a minute.
Okay, well, we've had a very nice and informative interview here, and we just thank you for your time, and I know I'm going to come back and learn some more from you, because I think you just have a storehouse of knowledge there that people need to.
I'd be glad to give you anything I can give you.
Okay.
That would help as far as nursing is concerned.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I enjoyed it.